Tom asked me to give you a bit of an overview of the structure of the National Park Service's approach to climate change, sort of how we're approaching it, and then a bit about our current projects. So that's a lot to squash into 10 minutes. I will preface this by saying I'm from the state of New Jersey, which means I can talk really fast, but I will try to keep it comprehensible. So this is the US National Park System. We currently have 415 units, stretching from Maine to Alaska, Caribbean to American Samoa. And we have 118 that are in the coastal zone, so that's about a quarter of what we care for and is in the space of concern. Park Service was founded in 1916 with this legislative charge to take care of these places by such manner and such means as will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. And I will say the Park Service takes this very seriously. We cite this in almost everything we do. And in 1966, the National Park Service was designated as the lead federal agency for cultural heritage with the National Historic Preservation Act. That means we not only care for the heritage that is in parks, but we also run our National Register of Historic Places, provide guidance to states, tribes, and local governments, among many other responsibilities. The Park Service does not have a similar national role for natural heritage. Back to the Park Service, we have lots of parks, as I've just said. Here's an example of some of our cultural ones. And I will say that over the past few decades, particularly the last decade and a half, we have been noticing lots of increasing environmental stresses on these places. And so in response to these challenges, in 2009, the National Park Service created its Climate Change Response Program to help figure out how the Park Service should address climate change and all of the challenges that it brings. This is our current team. We have a total of 15 people currently. I am the DC bubble, and I am the lead for cultural heritage, as Robin just introduced. Our first major statement of what we're going to do is the Climate Change Response Strategy, which was released in 2010. And it set out 4 major themes, or pillars, as we like to call them, for climate change response: science, adaptation, mitigation, and communication. Science is working with all the data and trends and observations. Adaptation is figuring out what to do about it. Mitigation is getting our environmental footprint down. And communication is sharing all of this, both within the Park Service and with all the public, which currently includes over 330 million visitors a year. So again, with this charge, over the last 9 years, we've done action plans, we've done a range of guidance and strategies. We are in the process, we are almost done with downscaled climate projection reports for every park. And the key thing is, as I said, with the legislative charge from 1916 to preserve unimpaired, we are recognizing that unimpaired cannot mean unchanging. We're going to have to manage change while we are protecting these places. And so we've produced a series of policy documents that start to address how we will do that. I'm going to focus briefly on the cultural resources one. This included a major statement that climate change will impact cultural heritage, and we must also learn from cultural heritage to better help us address climate change. And we responded to 3 major questions. What is adaptation for cultural resources? How should we make good decisions? And how do we communicate climate change science and impacts? And very briefly, these 3 questions. What is climate change adaptation? That is what we do for cultural heritage. We do not expect it to change on its own. How do we make good decisions? We will combine vulnerability and significance includes contemporary significance, and we will recognize loss. And also that cultural heritage is an absolutely critical vehicle for conveying this human story of climate change. Now, we squashed a whole lot into 4.5 pages, but that wasn't enough to tell all of our units what to do. So over the next few years, we prepared the Cultural Resources Climate Change Strategy. This was released in early January of 2017. And what it does is it takes all of those pieces of the policy memo and it organizes responses into 4 forward-looking goals. Goal 1 is connect impacts to information, taking that idea of impacts on, learning from, and applying it across those 4 pillars: science, adaptation, mitigation, and communication, to create a broad conceptual framework. Understand the scope is really looking at research and drilling down to understand what the effects of climate change will be on all of our cultural heritage. Integrating practice is taking all of our cultural resource management practices and figuring out how to fit climate change issues into all of those. And learning and sharing is working with our US and our international colleagues. We are all stewards of human history, so we'll do this better if we work together. And recently, we have been drilling down and moving on. So under goal 2, what we have been doing is what I call material thresholds research. that's really figuring out what the stresses are that climate change is causing. This is an example of adobe from Fort Union National Monument in New Mexico. For goal 3, we've been integrating our practice. We have a prioritization project, and we are assessing our vulnerability assessment process. Where I say we're the government. We're also doing some reaching out. We are working on guidance on how to deal with historic buildings and flooding. We are working on a training program to better take things that have been done in one park and help other parks learn about successes from one place to the other, called this the technology transfer. And we have been working on sharing and telling climate stories. We've also been reaching up, particularly helping the broader federal family work on social science integration into global change research. And then we have international exchange, which is why I'm here. Now, I know I probably only have about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to briefly touch on these 3 big projects. Our prioritization project has started with Cape Lookout National Seashore, which is based in coastal North Carolina, 2 barrier islands, literally right at sea level. Not a matter of if, only a matter of when. They've been hit by many hurricanes and nor'easters already. So our superintendent there said, I can't save all of these with the money I have, and even if I had more money, I can't save them all at once. Where do I start? So we've taken that idea from the policy memo of vulnerability and significance, and we took significance and have broken it out into, I think we've been calling it intrinsic significance and use potential, and these are all of our categories, and we have weighted them. So it's not perfect. This is specific for historic buildings, but it is currently our starting point. We are now piloting this in a second park, and I've just gotten the go-ahead to translate this for archaeology. For vulnerability assessments, Park Service is not a command and control organization. I like to think of it as a coordinate and suggest. So over the years that we've been developing these strategies, we've had multiple parks and regions do their own vulnerability assessments, which means we now have a lot of pilot studies that don't yet talk to each other. So we're in the process of bringing these all together, archaeology, ethnographic resources, cultural landscapes, and so forth. So we're now figuring out who has described exposure how, who has described sensitivity how, and which of these different methods seems to be the most transferable and the most successful for different management questions. And then finally, the other thing I wanted to mention to you is that idea of climate stories. There are 4 different topics that were outlined in the policy memo, and we realized these are actually the basis for several questions. How are we seeing change in the material world around us? How are traditional and associated communities experiencing change? How do past societies respond to past environmental change? And what are the origins of our modern climate change situation? We're also realizing that we may have the origins of a 5th story type: how are cultural resources the source of solutions for climate change? Now, these are not just so stories. They're certainly not things we make up. We have adopted a scientific narrative method called the and, but, therefore method of storytelling from science communicator Randy Olson. And we have been writing these up and training our interpreters staff and actually all of our facilities management staff in how to find and share and write these stories with the public and within the Park Service. It's definitely the most popular thing that I do. And finally, I will say I'm here. And I'm really grateful for the chance to have blasted you with all of the information that we can do.
Thank you very much.